Welcome to 10 for 10, a series of interviews with personalities and dedicated leaders across the Major Arena Soccer League. I'm your host, Erik Bergrud. For this week's episode, I'm joined by legendary American soccer journalist Michael Lewis. Welcome to 10 for 10, Michael.
Thank you very much, Erik. Great to be on the show, and it was great to finally meet you at the MASL All-Star Game. I know we've spoken on the media, on the internet for years, but I feel like we're friends from way back when. But thanks for having me on.
Well, thank you. Let's get started. And you kind of foreshadowed my first two questions, so I'll go with the first one. So as you said, we recently met in person for the first time at the MASL All-Star Game in Utica. What was your general take of the event, and what did you learn from the players you interviewed?
I enjoyed the event. It was fantastic. It was a very good fan event. Memorable game, an all-star game where players actually tried. I'm not going to mention any other leagues, NBA, but I enjoyed that yes, it wasn't life and death, but I enjoyed the action, no doubt about it. I also enjoyed the fan fest afterwards, where the fans came onto the field and got an opportunity to meet their stars, get autographs. It was a big deal. I'm talking to some of the players. A little kid comes up for an autograph. I know what the responsibility is. I moved out of the way because it's a once-in-a-lifetime experience. I think we were all sports fans at one time. I thought the event was very well run. I give congratulations to Tommy Tanner and his staff. It was great for me because I got an opportunity to take the train up from New York City. It was a lot easier, believe it or not, than taking a plane because I didn't have to go through security or anything like that. And I could do work on the way back. And I wrote my column on the way back, like 2,000, 3,000 words about everything that happened. But an enjoyable time, definitely. I'd like to see the league do that again.
Although we finally met this year, our paths first crossed unofficially in 1985 at a United States Men's National Team World Cup qualifying match in Torrance, California, a match which eliminated them from the 1986 World Cup. Can you put into context for our viewers the concept of a U.S. national team featuring many indoor soccer stars of the day?
Yeah, at the time, there was no North American Soccer League, and the only league around where players could play in the United States on a regular basis was the Major Indoor Soccer League. So you had several players, if I'm not mistaken, Kevin Crowe from the San Diego Sockers, and among other players who had like a double life, and it was not easy transitioning from indoor to outdoor. And I give Alkis Panagoulias, the U.S. coach at the time, a lot of credit just to get a team together. It did not turn out very well for the U.S. that night against Costa Rica. Costa Rica won 1-0, knocked the U.S. out of the World Cup qualifying exactly a year to the day to the start of the World Cup. There was a lot of irony in that, I think, as well, too. But back in the day, there were no other leagues where players were playing. And this was the only way for the U.S. To get players. Not the perfect way of doing things. Now, of course, it's a different universe out there.
So throughout this season, we are exploring topics related to the business of indoor soccer. How has the soccer media environment changed since you began covering the NASL's Rochester Lancers in the mid-1970s?
Tremendously. I think I've been spoiled because, with the Lancers, no problem. It was a smaller market, but I could go into the locker room, talk to as many players as I wanted to one-on-one, and I prefer to do that. Mixed zones, press conferences, yes, I've been through them. Sometimes if you don't get called, you don't get your question thrown out there, but I enjoy going one-on-one. Through the years, at one time, I'll go back to the 1985 U.S. national team game against Costa Rica. I was in the locker room with several other writers. We could go up to players. I remember Ricky Davis was at his locker, his head in his hands, knowing that he might not ever get to another World Cup again. And I put that into my story. These days, and I could understand because the media has grown exponentially, that they can't let us into U.S. national team locker rooms. There's a mixed zone, and a mixed zone can be a wild and crazy place. sometimes it's all about, again, getting one or two questions in while you're holding your recorder or cell phone or whatever device you do have. There are a lot more media outlets out there. Way back in the day, there were newspapers, radio, maybe some television. Now, newspapers as well, but you've got so many different internet websites out there that it's so difficult to count and to figure out who's legit and who isn't. It's up to the soccer communication directors to figure that out. It's a different time, definitely. One other thing I'll mention, it has nothing to do with writing, but I was in Trinidad. I hope I'm not getting into another question. I was in Trinidad and Tobago when the U.S. qualified for the 1990 World Cup. They allowed us into the locker room, and I brought my camera with me. It was a Canon film camera, and I took pictures of the players celebrating in the locker room. All PG-rated stuff, nothing X-rated or R-rated at all. I don't think I could do that today, but it was some of my favorite photos I've ever taken, because there weren't any other photographers in the locker room at the time. They were getting their pictures developed.
Back to the Lancers. What inspired you to write the Rochester Lancers history book, Alive and Kicking and Still Alive and Kicking?
Yeah. Years ago, when I was covering the Lancers, I knew that they were a different team, a special team. They were the antithesis of the New York Cosmos. Cosmos had everything. Lancers scraped for a lot of things. As I learned the history of the team at the time, and we're talking decades ago, I said, I want to write a book about them someday. And of course, our day jobs get in the way of things. And of course, mine did. And I slowly but surely over the years started to compile old articles, started to do interviews, started to write the first chapter I wrote was 1977. I didn't write it in order because that was the most memorable season I had with the team. But it was something I wanted to do before I died. I know that sounds crazy, but the worst thing to do is to go through life and say, damn, I should have done this. I know that sounds crazy. And as it turned out, I had extra time during the pandemic, and I completed the rest of the book. My wife was the editor, got yelled at a lot by her for how can you write like this, or people don't know what a brace is and you got to explain this. And I took it in stride, but it was a project, a passion project I wanted to do and let the world know that not everything was like the New York Cosmos back then. The Lancers, I won't say they were a typical NASL franchise, but they were a different franchise, and a lot of crazy and unusual stories. And I'm glad I did it. I didn't get rich from the book, but there's something to be said about following your passion.
In January 1992, you went on a record-setting trip with the Harrisburg Heat, as the then National Professional Soccer League team played 3 road games in some 48 hours, becoming the first NPSL team to win 3 away matches in as many days. What are your fondest recollections of that trip?
Surviving the bus ride, definitely. One thing I'll mention is the coach and general manager of the Heat was Jim Polahan, who was a member of the Rochester Lancers way back in 1977 when I covered them. He knew me as a person and as a writer. I told him I'm not looking, this is not a tabloid story. I want to do a 3-day in a life story, mega story about a soccer team on the road. Now, I didn't realize they were going to win all 3 road matches in that 48-hour period, which is pretty stunning. I did all my interviews, or not all. I did a lot of the background interviews of all the players on the bus. Got a chance to meet a young Bermudan player by the name of David Bascombe, who's now the Baltimore Blast coach. I think it's a lesson to any writer or a member of the media. By the way, don't burn any bridges, from Jim Polahan to David. But in terms of my most memorable moment, I guess it was probably the team winning its 3rd game in the 48-hour period. It was, just if you do it at home, that's pretty incredible. But when you're on the road, you're sleeping in different hotels, you're traveling all the time. It's not an easy thing to do. They had three very good opponents. What was it? Canton, Dayton, and Detroit. Maybe not in that order, but three challenging matches. But the players afterwards wanted me to go on every road trip with them for the rest of the season, and I said, "Sorry, I've got my day job back there." I took copious notes, and it was one of my favorite stories I've ever done, just because I think it gave a slice of life of what it was like on the road. And don't know if I would do it again at my age, but I'm glad I did it, and I hope maybe someone else will do it someday. A similar project.
Yeah. So final question. Does it seem surreal to you that Mark Pulisic was a rookie forward for that Heat team, and subsequently you have been covering his son Christian with the U.S. men's national team?
It was very, very surreal. But I also knew Mark from way back in 1987. I covered him in the under 19 Eastern New York Youth Championship final game, and he scores 2 goals in the match, including the game winner in the waning minutes. And I wound up talking to him. At the time, he's just another player. I shouldn't say just another player, but he scored the winning goal. Got a chance to talk to Mark again. He remembered me. I remembered him, obviously. And I wound up doing a story about him trying out for a team in Croatia during some tough times there. But yeah, did I think that, wow, looking back at it, wow, he was going to be the father of the best U.S. player of our generation? No way. It's funny. I've gotten a chance to interview Mark since then, talking about Christian's early days, his career as well. People don't realize Mark had a fantastic indoor career, and it gets lost in Christian's honors and story, which I could understand, but I think that's one reason why I like to write about the history of the game as well, too, because people won't forget. I think it's important to remind people that there was soccer before us. And hopefully there'll be other writers. Nothing wrong about writing about it today. Don't get me wrong. I do plenty of that. But remembering what occurred before. But yeah, it was a surreal experience talking to father and son at different venues. No doubt about it.
Well, thank you, Michael, for joining us today. We'll be back next week with another episode of 10 for 10.